What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Dr. Vincent Esposito, and today we are going to be talking about gluten sensitivity versus celiac disease, kind of what the differences are, what they mean, and more importantly, what you can do about it. But before we get to that, if you haven't, please subscribe to the channel below. And if you are interested in this content or you want to know more about what we're talking about here, then just leave a comment and I'll get to it. So we're going to start this video talking a little bit about celiac disease and what it is, more because it's a little bit more straightforward and simpler to explain. So celiac disease is actually an autoimmune condition. So that means our immune system ends up attacking our own body tissue. It's actually the only autoimmune disease that has a known trigger, which is gluten, obviously. So what happens is our immune system ends up attacking our intestinal cells, the villi in our intestinal cells, and they end up getting destroyed. And what happens is this ends up leading to malabsorption of nutrients, both micronutrients and macronutrients. And this could obviously lead to much bigger things down the road other than complete destruction of the intestinal lining, which isn't that good on its own. So most of the symptoms associated with celiac disease are mostly intestinal. So you're gonna feel maybe some gas, bloating, abnormal stools, potentially vomiting, diarrhea, and most things of that nature. There are some extra intestinal symptoms. Most of them happen in children for the most part. It's usually failure to thrive, so they don't grow properly. It could be iron deficiency is another big sign, and it could lead to infertility sometimes in women. Celiac disease can actually be pretty difficult to diagnose at times because sometimes there are silent symptoms, so you might not necessarily be feeling something, so you might not actually get a diagnosis until later in life. Ideally, you would want to pick this up as early as possible because it could lead to really severe, serious damage down the road. Now, the treatment for celiac disease is fairly straightforward. It's simply maintaining a gluten-free diet for the rest of your life, but there are some other things to be aware of if you happen to have celiac disease. So for one, chances are there is some sort of nutrient malabsorption, so making sure there are no nutrient deficiencies would be key. Another thing that's really key and that I would suggest is finding an advocacy group or a group maybe online that you can associate with other people who might have celiac disease, because it is something that's very hard to go through on your own, because unless you have an incredibly supportive support system and family around you, it's gonna affect their lives as well. So knowing there's people you can talk to and reach out to as you're going is really key. The other big thing that comes around with celiac disease is you wanna obviously follow up going forward, basically throughout your life, to see if anything's changed or whatnot. And again, it is kind of an autoimmune disease, so it is something that you're going to have to deal with long term. So those are the things to keep in mind when it comes to celiac disease. Now, gluten intolerance is a bit different. It's a lot more subtle. It's not as obvious as celiac disease. So we're going to go over some of the differences right now. So in gluten intolerance, our intestinal cells are linked together like this. They're held together by what is known as gap junctions. Now, what happens with gluten intolerance is it ends up damaging these connections, and these connections start to kind of come apart. So as you can see, there's kind of holes in this mesh here. So this allows proteins and other toxins to get through where under normal circumstances they wouldn't. This is why gluten intolerance is not exactly an autoimmune disease, because when those proteins and toxins get through those gap junctions, because they're now opened, they allow our immune system responds by attacking the invaders that are not supposed to be there. And what happens is those intestinal cells end up kind of getting caught in the crossfire, and they become kind of collateral damage in a sense. Now, with gluten intolerance, you are going to get those similar symptoms in terms of you're going to get the diarrhea, the gas, the bloating. There are some intestinal symptoms that are overlapping, but what usually happens with gluten intolerance that's a little different is you get these more subtle extra-intestinal symptoms. So things like brain fog, just kind of lack of energy, fatigue, joint pain, muscle aches, These are all kind of things that usually don't end up happening with a strict celiac disease diagnosis. They end up happening with gluten intolerance. You just generally don't feel great. That's more of a symptom of gluten intolerance. Those who are gluten intolerant are also more susceptible to depressive-like symptoms. There's a couple theories for this. The first one has to do with the lack of serotonin production. So serotonin is actually created mostly in the gut and around the gut. About 90% of it is, and that is obviously useful for feeling more uplifted, happy, kind of energetic. So if you're not creating the amount of serotonin you need, that can lead to more kind of depression-like symptoms. The other is the disruption with the gut microbiome. So with all this damage to the gut lining, it actually throws off our gut bacteria. And being that we know more about this gut-brain connection and how our gut affects potentially our thoughts and mood and how we feel, when that gets altered, so does our mood and how we feel in general. So if our gut's not exactly functioning in it properly, then we might feel some of those more depression-like symptoms, or fatigue, or anxiety, or even just lethargy, or just lack of energy. Now, in terms of the differences between celiac disease and gluten intolerance, celiac disease affects about 1% of all Americans, so that's give or take around 3 million people. Gluten intolerance is actually 6 to 7 times more prevalent. So we're talking somewhere between like 18 and 20 million Americans might be gluten intolerant. And if you know that, you've probably felt some of these symptoms, so you can kind of empathize or jive with what I'm saying here. But it might not be as obvious until you might remove gluten and kind of see how you feel over the next few weeks. For those who are gluten intolerant, if you're looking to go off gluten, I generally suggest doing it for about 6 weeks. The reason being, the antibodies that are responsible for that reaction to gluten have about a half-life of 21 days, meaning by about 42 days or 6 weeks, that most of them should have died off and recycled at that point. So hopefully the reaction is less, if not gone, by that point. Now, regardless, if you happen to have a celiac disease diagnosis or gluten intolerance, there is some discrepancy when it comes to gluten-free options, especially when you go shopping. So a lot of the gluten-free replacements, especially that you might see in the supermarket, they're much more nutrient sparse than their even gluten-containing counterparts. So it's really important to take a look at what's in these gluten-free items, especially if you're buying, snacks and things of that nature. One of the big reasons for this is a lot of them have tons of added sugar, salt, and additives and preservatives to kind of make up for that loss of flavor when you take out the gluten. So it's really important that you take a look at these and make sure you're getting all the nutrients you actually need. This is why, and I'll link my nutrition video here, that we focus on shifting more towards the whole foods, more of a plant-based style of eating, where you can get all those vitamins, minerals, and other nutrients you need, flavonoids, things of that nature, without having to resort to kind of these gluten-free alternatives that might not necessarily be healthy, even though they are tolerable. So it's really something to watch out for going forward. So I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you enjoyed the information or you like it, please like and subscribe below. It'd mean a lot. I'd love to keep doing this. I'm trying to upload videos once or twice a week. If you do have any questions, feel free to comment down below. I want to make this an open dialogue, so if there's questions, comments, concerns, complaints, I'm open to all of them. So please leave them down below and I'll get to them as quickly as I can. But until then, take care, guys.